Hi, it's Graham here and this is 5-Minute Photography, where we talk about photography in easy chunks of 5 minutes or less. Today we're talking about exposure. Before we get into it, let me invite you to subscribe to the channel and give the video the old thumbs up. Okay, let's talk photography. Exposure is another way of saying how much light is in your photograph. Photograph means light picture, so getting light in the camera is really important. Light comes in the camera through the aperture, which is an opening in the lens, and the shutter, which is like a door or a pair of curtains inside the camera body. And when it reaches the sensor, we can use ISO to change how sensitive the sensor is to the light that's come in. If we don't have enough light in the camera, our picture will be underexposed or too dark, and if we have too much light coming in, then the picture will be overexposed or too bright. But how do we know what's the right amount of light, or if we're even close to it? Well, that's where the exposure meter comes in. The exposure meter is a light meter that lives inside the camera that's always reading the scene that the camera is looking at. So if you're looking over there, you'll get one light reading. If you're looking over there, you'll get a completely different light reading. Most cameras' exposure meters look something like this. It's a scale where there's a minus on one side, a plus on the other side, and a 0 in the middle. If the scale's at the plus side, it's too bright. If the scale's at the minus side, it's too dark. And the goal is to change the settings and get the scale to balance at the 0 in the middle. That's the camera's way of saying that you've got the right amount of light in the camera to make a well exposed picture. If you use the camera in manual mode, then whenever you change an aperture or shutter speed setting, that change will show on the exposure meter, and it will move that marker towards the minus or the plus side depending on whether you take away light or add light. So for example, opening the aperture, making a wider aperture, a smaller f number, that will add more light to the picture and would move the marker to the plus side of the scale. Using a faster shutter speed takes away light, that moves the marker towards the minus end of the scale. And between the two, if we get the exposure meter to rest on the 0, then we should be in just about the right place. So say you're looking through the camera, you move your settings around, you balance that exposure meter up, and the settings happen to land on a 60th of a second with f22. That would be a well exposed picture. You can take the shot and you're happy. But a 60th of a second with f22 is the same amount of light as all these other pairs of settings. Each of these pairs of settings is the same amount of light, because if you take away light with one of the settings, you can add it back with the other setting and vice versa. So there's different ways to balance the exposure meter using different settings to get the same amount of light. So if different settings can give you the same amount of light, why would you choose one pair of settings over another pair of settings? The answer is that different camera settings will give your picture a different look. Remember, aperture affects depth of field and shutter speed affects how movement is captured. So for example, say you wanted to do a portrait with a shallow depth of field. You just want the subject's face in focus and the background to be blurry and out of focus. You would start by choosing a wide aperture. Start with say f2.8, f3.5, f4, something like that, and then use the shutter speed to balance up the exposure meter. If you only change the aperture setting, that's going to let tons more light in the camera and the picture is just going to be overexposed. When you change the aperture setting, you need to also change the shutter speed setting to rebalance the exposure meter in the middle to keep a well exposed picture. On the other hand, if you wanted a slow shutter speed, maybe you're photographing a waterfall, so you would start with say half a second on your shutter speed and then do everything you can with your other camera settings to make that setting work. Yes, it's about getting the right amount of light in the camera first and foremost, but it's also about making the camera settings do what we want them to do to make the picture look the way we want it to look. So if you've done all you can with your aperture and shutter speed settings but the exposure meter still isn't balanced, then you could either increase or decrease your ISO, and that change will also be reflected on the exposure meter. Okay, in summary, exposure is about how much light is in your photograph. If there's too much light, the picture's overexposed. Not enough light and it's going to be underexposed. Between aperture, shutter speed and ISO, using the exposure meter, we can control how much light is coming in the camera, what the camera's doing with that light, depth of field, and how movement is captured. That really unlocks so much potential for your photography. And you know, as photographers, we don't want to talk about numbers, we're more interested in pictures. Having a lot of numbers flying around can be really difficult. For me, I'm a slow learner. It took me a long time to get on top of this stuff, but getting this stuff inside you really empowers your photography. And it's especially useful when you're in a tricky situation or when conditions change suddenly or something unexpected happens on a shoot. Then you can quickly change your approach to handle whatever changes are thrown at you. A well exposed picture isn't a guarantee of a good picture, But understanding this stuff really gives us the power to take control of our photography and start making pictures rather than just taking them. Okay, thanks so much for watching. I hope you took something away from this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and take a second to give the video a thumbs up, that really helps. Head to my website grahamdargie.com where you can find out all about what I do. You can also get my free ebook and Intro to DSLR cheat sheet. Thank you for watching, enjoy your photography, stay safe, and I'll see you out there.